Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, Jacqueline from JP Mint, and Greg the Single Guy, bringing you episodes from around the world about the best kept secret in education. You got it, international teaching. Welcome to the show.
All right. Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast. I am Jacqueline from JP Mint Consulting, and I'm here with Kent the Cat Guy. Hi, Kent.
Hey, JP Mint. Good morning.
Greg is away, and we have a special guest with us, Dr. Kelley Ridings, who I think is calling us in from Shanghai. Is that right, Kelley?
That is right. Hello to you both, Kent and to Jacqueline.
Good morning, Kelley.
Good evening. It's almost midnight.
You're
in Mexico.
So we've got the whole globe covered.
Yeah, we do. We definitely do. Kelley, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now in Shanghai? And then we'll work backwards. But I'm curious to know what you're doing in Shanghai right now.
Well, I was in Shanghai. I've just moved. I'm actually in Dalian, so I meant to say that. Sorry about that. So I'm still in China, though. And so I was working
Beijing?
in, yeah, it's north. It's up in the northeastern part of China, right?
Okay.
So I was working in Shanghai. I've been there for over 12 years, and I work with Shanghai SMIC Private School, was the international division superintendent for the school. But in June of this year, was my retirement. So I retired from the schools, and now I am, but I'm putting that in air quotes. That's all in air quotes there, because that's
congratulations
just the retirement.
on the retirement, but you're not really retired, are you?
No, not exactly. So I still work as a consultant with the school. And then I'm also have started my own business as well, a consulting firm, EduNet Pro. And so I'm doing that as well. So that startup and all is what all the air quotes are about. So I'm still live in China and still very much involved in education, but just in a different way now.
That was EduNet? How do you say that?
EduNet.
EduNet.
Education, Internet, and Pro.
Everybody's going to be Googling Janet. What?
Yeah.
I don't know what they'll get.
I don't
EduNet.
know what they're going to get.
Is that also
EduNet
your
Pro.
website there, Kelley? EduNet?
Yes, it is. EduNet Pro. So yes, it's all brand new. So the website, everything, the whole thing is just starting and getting up and running, but it's based on my books that I've written. And so I have one book already out and about international education and how to find jobs. And then I have another book coming out in January, which is about how schools can develop a hiring system to help them to find highly qualified candidates to recruit for their school teams.
Have you got a title for that book yet?
I do, yes. So that title is called The Gift Hiring Method. You can confidently recruit quality school staff.
Now, Kelley,
Excellent.
what kind of consultant are you? And who is your client, or who is your ideal client?
So that's a very good question and a kind of a broad client base. I work with a few different types. So one type of client that I work with is one who is newly into international education or who is thinking about it and wants to figure out how to navigate that world of the hiring process. So I'm not a recruiter, but rather I help them to organize their profile, their resume, the letters of intent, the letter of cover letter, and all of the different parts of their application, figuring out where to go and so on. So I help them to get organized into the process so that they can be able to figure out where the jobs are and to help themselves figure out what they want in that process. So that's one client that I work with. Another client that I work with is teachers that are non-traditional to the international teaching world. So these are people that are coming from other countries that maybe are not native English speakers, but yet they're still very passionate about education and teaching, and a lot of times have great experience, college experience and professional experiences, but they're having challenges finding jobs in international schools. Sometimes they worked in international schools within their own country, their home countries, but they want to go elsewhere. And so I work with clients like that. A third group of clients that I work with is leaders who are maybe sort of starting off in their leadership pathway in schools and want to move up. And how do they do that? How do they find the roles? How do they prepare themselves to do that well? And then the final group is people who are in kind of maybe say mid-level leadership roles, and they want to move up into that senior role, but yet maybe they've had some career blocks to doing that. And how can they be able to overcome those blocks so that they can get into the kind of roles that they're seeking? So 4 different types of people. So I work both with teachers and leaders.
Well, I must say that sounds very, very familiar because I think that's exactly what I do. But I really appreciate how you've like, because I often say I work with new teachers and veteran teachers, but I really like how you've broken it down and systematically I can see each pathway as you were talking about it.
Let's
Well,
go back to the
it's
beginning of
important.
your. Let's go back to the beginning of your journey. I'm curious. I mean, our viewers and our listeners will know that you probably weren't born in China. So, talk to us about your journey to how you got to where you are now.
Well, it's been an interesting path that's, I think most people, they come across it in many different ways, how they come into contact first with international education. And so for me, when I was in college, I lived right on the border. I'm from New Mexico. And so I went to university in New Mexico. So I lived on the U.S.-Mexican border. And I had friends that were in Mexico, knew a little bit of that international world through them. And that was my first real contact, probably internationally. And then when I went into teaching after I left university, after I got my master's degree, I had gotten a job teaching in a college in Mexico on the border, I lived in
Wow.
El Paso, Texas. So right across the border was the city Ciudad Juarez. So I was teaching in a university there and I taught English part-time. And so that was my first teaching experience. And then I went and visited a friend who had moved into Guadalajara in the central part of Mexico. And I saw there were a lot of language schools there for English. And so I thought, well, I could do that maybe. And at that time I was teaching both in that university and I was also teaching part-time in El Paso. So I was kind of commuting back and forth, and both were just part-time jobs, and I'd been doing that for a while. And then I thought, well, I can move down into to Guadalajara and try there. And so I did, and ended up there actually finding a job in an international school. So I was teaching full-time. And
Was that the American school by
yes,
any
so that was
chance?
the American School Foundation of Guadalajara, right? And
Right
so I
across
was
the street from Midtown.
well,
Oh,
it's
was
just,
there a shopping center at that point?
no, it was right across the street from their the Chivas, which is the soccer team, the professional soccer team of Guadalajara. And so that's where they practiced and did all their work. It was their athletic club.
Well, now
So
it's a
that
mall.
was, yeah. Oh, I
They've
didn't know that.
they've moved that stadium out of town, and then now they've built this huge mall that's very luxurious, and it's right across the street
Oh,
from
wow.
ASFG.
Well, I haven't been there in a long time, so I don't
How
know
many years
what
did
it
you?
is
How
now.
many?
I was there for 4 years, so I was teaching high school history and English, and so that was my start. And then when I left there, I thought I'd go to another school internationally, and I ended up back in the U.S. And I thought, okay, that's just a little bit of a detour, and I'd be there for a bit. And 14 years later is when I went back abroad again. So this time I came into Asia, and I was working in South Korea. And then I moved to China and to SMIC private school, and that was where I was until I just retired.
So that sounds like 3 international schools, but in a span of quite a long time.
So how long were you
Yeah.
in Korea? How long
Yeah.
for,
I was
Kelley?
there for a year in Korea working with a school in Busan. And then I was with SMIC in China for 12 and a half years. Well, I still am with them. So it's actually almost 13 years now. Yeah.
Tell us about, well, first of all, what took you? You were in New Mexico, you're growing up, you're by the border. You go to school in New Mexico or you moved to
I
Texas
did.
at that point? Okay, and then
No,
what,
I went to school in New Mexico is where I grew up. Yeah.
you grew up in, and then what took you to Texas then?
Well, right, El Paso is right on the border of the corner of the state where I live.
Okay,
In
so it's like right
where I
there in the
lived
neighborhood.
in New Mexico, and so it was only a couple hours south of where I'm from. I was part of my growing up years was visiting my grandparents who lived in El Paso too. So I was familiar with El Paso.
And then at some point you got a PhD as well. When did that come in?
Yeah. So when I was back in the U.S., I decided to get my PhD, and I had started out in leadership. My mentor, Sherry Fletcher, who was also my boss at the time, and she came to me one day. I was out on duty, and she came up to me and sat down. She said, "So when are you going to complete your leadership, your administrative degree?" I kind of looked at her, and I'm like, "I'm not working on a leadership administrative
Complete
degree."
it. When am I going to start it?
But that's typical
Like you
Sherry.
hadn't even started it. So,
Yeah.
okay.
And then done that. We hadn't had that conversation, but that's typical Sherry. So I just thought, well, maybe I should try that. So I looked into it, and so I started working on it in Las Cruces, which is just south of where I was from. So that's where I began. And then at first it was just getting my license as an administrator. And then I decided, well, maybe I should get the degree. And I kind of floundered around a bit trying to figure out what degree to get, and then I decided to go for the PhD. And so that's what I did. And there it was.
Kelley, we were bantering a little bit before we went on the air, and I know the ITP crowd didn't hear that, but
It's for
you're
the
witty.
Patreon.
That's going to save that for the Patreon and the police stories. You're witty, you banter, you're fun. Did you really fit in
With the PhD.
with a PhD program in education? You've been a superintendent. How does that world, I'm sure you're fantastic at it, but you're fun and you're easy to talk to. What's that been like for you to be sort of in the upper echelons of education?
Well, I think there's a place for everything. My humor is kind of low key and kind of subtle at times, and so a lot of times I'll say a joke and people takes them a bit to realize, and then a few moments later they might laugh about it because they
Few
realize
moments
what
later.
I've said. But I do think that it's important. I think humor matters. Actually, one of the very first books that I read about education when I first got into teaching, and I was trying to figure out classroom management, and the book that I read was How to Use Humor in the Classroom. And so
Okay.
as a management tool. And I think that's really important in having that because it builds connection with people. I just naturally just see humorous things about life at times. And so I'm not a person who's going to run around telling jokes. I can't actually tell jokes at all, but I do enjoy being able to just kind of point out sometimes life's absurdities along the way and having fun, a little bit. And so I like to do that, but I'm also a serious guy too. And so I do have kind of an academic side to me that's really pretty important. And I try to keep that focus when I'm in the work that I'm doing. But I like to show my humor too, even in my writing. I mean, I like to do that. When I specifically was looking for a narrator for my book, my first book, and I wanted somebody who had that ability to kind of have a voice that showed humor too, and for the things that I was talking about, because I couldn't do that narration. So that wasn't
So
going to be
you have
me.
an audio version. There's an
Yes.
audiobook version. Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Maybe
What made you think of going into that? Because it's not often that people think about going audio.
Well, I had read about it because that's just that's the academic side of me. So when I'm starting out on some new project or path. I want to figure out as much as I can about it. And so one of the things that I'd read about was the audio version, and I'd never really thought about it. And actually, at that point, I wasn't really that big into audiobooks myself. But I realized from that whole process that the reason I didn't like it sometimes was the narrator didn't really capture it for me. And so when I realized how important the narrator was, because for my book, I had to audition basically a number of people. And while they could read the book, but some of them weren't capturing the flavor of what I wanted with it. And that was really kind of an eye-opening process for me. So it was really, I enjoyed that part of it. And now I think it's really pretty important because I realize a lot of people, they have different preferences in the way that they read a book. And so some people they want the audio book. Maybe they, like one of my friends that I have, she actually can't physically hold a book and read the physical book so easily. It's hard on her neck. So she prefers the audiobook version.
Mhm.
And so some people,
Some people run or
Yeah.
cycle while they're listening to books. Yeah. Or do, household chores and things, just like podcasts. I wasn't a big podcast listener until I got turned on to ITP and Educators Going Global. And then now I started listening to it regularly, going for walks and listening to podcasts. My mother is also a very big audiobook, and she would agree with you, Kelley, right there with the voice is so important. The person has to take on, sometimes if it's fictional, they have to take on different characters and everything else. So how did you choose the person? Was it British? Was it American? Was it important that they sounded kind of like you?
Well, my narrator has the Southern accent a little bit that I wish that I had, maybe. So that is what his voice is.
It's your alter ego. I love that, Kelley.
But when you audition them, you put in a kind of a description of what you're looking for, and in terms of how that person should be reading and narrating the book. And so when I heard his voice on the clip, and most narrators, they leave a little bit of a clip, as sort of like a highlight of what their work is. And so the clip that he had was just like, oh, that's exactly what I want. And so I just knew he was the right one. And when I gave him the sample of my book to read, and he did a great job with it. So I was real happy with it. So, Steve Wilson's his name, and he has a little bit of a Southern accent, but he has the kind of the dry humor that I have, and real easy to work with. And so it was just, he made it sing in a way that I never could. So I wish that I could read better out loud, but that's just not who I am. And so I accept that.
And what's the name of this book that you're talking about? The one that's now...
the book that I have, the one for international schools, is called Teach or Lead Abroad, Easily Find Your Dream Job in International Schools.
So we're going to put these in the show notes so that the edupronet.com and the EduProNet. Is that right?
EduNet Pro.
EduNet Pro. I reversed it. EduNet Pro. And we're going to put all of this information in the show notes for me as well, so that I know where to go click on these things. But yeah, the links to your books and everything. Because I think I'm now very curious to hear even that audio version. If they have a sample of it in Amazon, I'd like to hear what this guy's voice is.
JP Mint, I don't interview the co-host very often. JP Mint, if you were going to read an audio book, what type of book would it be? You were going to be the voice. The narrator. What kind of book would it be?
If I was, I did it for my mom, actually. The reason I have this professional microphone. That. Yeah, my mom has had difficulty seeing for the last, I'd say, about 10 years. And I bought her a book in China. It was an Italian expat in China who wrote it. And it was a story of a number of women from Italy in China experiencing China. And I thought, this is kind of interesting because it's sort of the expat woman's version of China and through their eyes. When I gave it to her, she said, "That's great. I can't read it." And then I realized, oh my gosh, I just gave my mom a book.
And then
I said, okay, let me take it back. I'm gonna record reading it. So I read chapter by chapter, and it's surprisingly easy. I don't know, I didn't do takes or anything like that. If I slipped up, I just just kept reading because, I wasn't going to edit these clips. Well, as it turned out, a couple of other people wanted to listen to them too. So I have a cousin that listened to it, and I never did finish it though.
Your poor mom's
I
still
just
waiting for the
realized,
ending of that book.
I know. It's like
What does it
sitting
tell
Cliffhanger.
you,
behind
guy,
me.
too?
It's sitting behind me in my bookshelf and it's like, oh my gosh, I think I did like 7 chapters, but I never did finish it because then I moved out of China and went back to Canada. And but yeah, I would say like something that's of interest to me would be sort of that expat lifestyle, talking about like I would love Crazy Rich Asians. I would love to do that or something, because it's interesting and exciting for me. What about you, Kent? Let me turn it back
Anything
on
with
you.
cats in it. Anything with cats
Or
in it. Maybe
anime.
cat fancy. Yeah. Anything manga, light novels. Yeah. Kelley, I want to get to your books and things like that, your academic interests. But first of all, what's China like? What's Shanghai? Is Shanghai, what kind of city is it in China? I know Beijing is the capital. I know Hong Kong, newly acquired back 23 years ago. What's Shanghai like?
Yeah, well, Shanghai is a very modern city, and it's pretty international. The most international city, I think, in China, mainland China. And so it's a very modern place. It's very easy to get around. It's very clean. It's got they pay a lot of attention to things like architecture and park design and beauty, the natural beauty of air. You're driving along and they've got all these kind of sculpted gardens and things like that in a lot of different areas. It's just a very attractive place to live. So it's really nice in that regard. It's pretty easy as an international world traveler, I guess, to work there and live there, because a lot of the signs, everything is in English and as well as in Chinese, obviously. And so it's easy to get around. It's a very convenient city because they're just everywhere. There's something to do. I mean, if somebody is bored there, they're not trying very hard. So they don't want to find something. And so it's just basically I had a colleague I worked with, she said, well, I could be as international as I want, or I can be as Chinese as I want while I'm living there. And it's really her choice. And so I think that that's the way it can work, and so I think that it's a city that is very dynamic. There's a lot of things going on there. It's a financial hub of this country, and it's a good place to be. I didn't expect that I would be there for so long, and yet I really am glad that I did. I have ended up becoming a permanent resident of China.
I was going to ask about
Wow.
that. I figured as much. Since you moved into consulting, you don't need to worry about a work visa anymore then.
No. Yeah, that was all
Fantastic.
part of the plans. I was thinking about, well, what I could do after I was going to retire. And so I knew that if I wanted to stay here, that I'd need to be a permanent resident of China. And so I got that back in 21. And so it makes life a lot easier for me, but, which is why I can be here, and my business is from here as well in China. So this is my kind of my hub area, I guess, but, I can work anywhere in the world because I'm doing work internationally. So, I mean, digitally and, through digital nomadship. So it makes it nice.
And what made you move up north? Because I mean, that's going to be pretty darn cold coming up soon. It's October now.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm looking forward to that part, because I don't love the hot of the Shanghai summers too much. It can be, you were talking about the high humidity earlier before the broadcast began. And so that Shanghai humidity is brutal and the heat is brutal. So I'm going to be glad to not be in that, to Dalian, where I live. I've been here many, many times over the years. I really like it. It's still a big city. It's not one that many people have heard of, but it's a huge city. It's over 10 million people, and it's quite the dynamic place also, and really attractive. But it's more of a seaside town, which I kind of like. It's a nice change of pace, and
What is that? The
still
Sea
very
of China?
modern. Pardon?
Is that the Sea of China? I'm not sure of the geography.
Yeah.
Very close to
Yeah.
North
So
Korea.
Very
so
close
it's
to North
just
Korea.
right kind of there where not right next to North Korea, but it's kind of close to the Russian border. And if you move over a little bit to the northeast, it's going to be right on the China borders, right onto North Korea. Yeah. So it's pretty, and here, I mean, there's a shipbuilding, for example. It's a major hub for international travel, trade coming in. And so it's a very dynamic area. So, for that part of that type of industry.
And they have ice sculpture festival in that area?
Yeah,
No,
up north in
it's
Harbin. Yeah, every
That's
winter.
big.
but
It's
that's
a
not
huge thing.
where you are. How far?
No,
Give me an idea of how far is
it's
it?
just maybe a couple hours north of here by
Okay.
train. And so I went to that a couple of years ago, and really it's an amazing,
Mm-hmm.
they to
I
have
mean,
these massive sculptures.
the Chinese ice sculptors that would come to Canada, like we in Ottawa, in my hometown, had Winterlude. It's a winter festival every year in February, and by far the Chinese sculptors are amazing. I mean, the dragons and just they typically do like to use the animals like well, I'm
The
thinking like
Zodiac,
the
yeah.
dragon or the phoenix or something like something very flamboyant and flames coming off of them and stuff. And it's just incredible. I wish I had got up to Harbin while I was
And
there.
they have also like the lights that put the lights in them different colors. So they use that for night, particularly you can see to offer contrast, whole buildings that they've designed. I mean, it's a spectacular thing. Super cold.
Super.
You have to be prepared for that because it's like
Yeah.
20 below zero, it's cold, but it's a real amazing experience to see, and just snow everywhere, snow and obviously lots of ice, but people, and it's a fun atmosphere. So it's just a really interesting experience. So I'm very glad I got to finally see it. That was always been something I'd wanted to see, but not a fan of that super cold, but it was still great. So I loved it.
Well, you are from the southern part of the United States. I'm up in Seattle, and so it's not terribly cold, but it is 50 degrees north of the border of the equator. Hey, Kelley, not to flatter you, you seem like a pretty smart guy. What academically really gets you going in our field?
Well, leadership. That's what my doctorate is in. So educational leadership is a topic I'm really interested in. I'm also just really interested in business as a whole, and business leadership and productivity, change, and the educational change process is something that is pretty fascinating to me. It's actually the first class in college that I took when my doctorate program, and I was just fascinated with that. I had a long commute to get home after every class. It was at night classes, and I'd have to drive an hour to get back home, and I'd be thinking about that class the whole time. So it just was something that really fascinated me, and that was a long time ago, but I still am just deeply interested in it. And when I was doing my doctoral work, my dissertation was about at-risk students, because that was who had spent a lot of my career working with early on. And so I was looking at risk factors and how it impacts high school graduation rates. And so I have a kind of a broad, diverse interest in education and academics of that. And it's something I think I don't want to be in the research part of work, but I like to be able to kind of bridge that into putting it into practice, helping people to understand how they can use that research to better understand and make a bigger impact in the work that they're doing professionally when they're teaching and working in the schools. So that's what I really like to be able to do.
All right, let's take a moment for a little commercial about how to get in touch with us. You can, of course, find all four of us at the ITPexpat.com. That's www.itpexpat.com.
Or you could also find us at email at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
Or if you're into Facebook, we have a new Facebook group at www.facebook.com/groups/ITP Expat, where you can find all kinds of inside information about ITP Expat.
You can also find us on Instagram at ITP Expats. That's with an S. ITP Expats is our handle.
All right. And thank you, listeners. We have over 100 countries represented by our listeners. And though we're not monetized, we are here for you. And we would like to thank all of you for listening. So let's get back to the show.
For our listeners and viewers, please go to Dr. Kelley Ridings' LinkedIn, because it's absolutely chock full of information. In fact, that's how I got to know Kelley is by reading his fantastic blog articles. They're just little blurbs you put up on LinkedIn, but what really drew me in was the conversation that seemed to be happening in the comments, like comments and comments on, I don't know how you do it, and I don't get any comments. I'm like, I wish I had that conversation with people, but you have a gift for pulling in people while they're reading the article, and then I've actually commented on a few articles.
Yeah.
Where did you learn that, or is that just something that came naturally, or did you take a course on how to engage with your LinkedIn connections? What's going on?
It was a continuing education course, engaging in LinkedIn. Evening, he squeezed it in between work.
Well, I have studied it quite a bit. And so just like you said, Kent, I've read a lot of books about LinkedIn, and I felt like there was something more that I could be doing, but I wasn't really getting that. And then I came across a book by a terrific LinkedIn expert named Adam Houlihan, who's in Australia. And book, which is called Influencer, and I don't remember the subtitle, is basically how to use LinkedIn and for business purposes. And that was what really, his strategies that he outlined in that book is what I use to help to guide how I've used it. So I purposely have followed his strategies. And so I do some work with him, used his firm, which is called Prominence Global, worked a little bit with them, and have used his ideas to help to structure what I'm doing. And it's made a giant difference, because I really like to engage with people, even though it's a virtual interactions. But to me, it's just like what we're doing here. Okay, we're across 3 different time zones, or really literally around the globe, but we can still have meaningful real-time interactions, just like you would if you were sitting in an actual room or a coffee shop having a coffee latte or something with each other.
Uh-huh.
It's the same idea. And so I try to do that with the work that I'm doing on LinkedIn as well. And so I'm just amazed at how many connections that I've made with people and have maintained them and have helped them through just kind of offering either just comments back and forth through the various posts. And sometimes people are messaging me, of course, and we have a deeper interactions there, and really able to help them. And I know that it's making a difference because it gives them some insight into things that they hadn't really thought of before. And so I've worked with people that are in India, people who are in Kenya, people who are in the Middle East, people in Asia. So it's just all around the globe, and I'm able to get that kind of deep connection. And it really is pretty amazing. It was something I didn't quite expect to happen actually in the way that it did, but yet that did. And so earlier when you asked me, Jacqueline, about who I'm working with, and the kind of people that are my clients, well, part of that came from this kind of organic growth of the readership, the people that follow me and interact with me on LinkedIn and who I interact with. And so I've learned quite a lot from them. So as much as they learn from me, I'm learning from them too. And I really like that. I enjoy that mutual exchange.
Kelley, sorry, JP, did you want to follow up on that?
No, you go ahead.
Kelley, when I see teachers from around the world, people who are educated, I work with teachers who were maybe educated in Saudi Arabia, maybe educated in Egypt or Oman. And so I'm always comparing what teachers are like around the world. What is something that you found that teachers have in common, no matter where they've become teachers? What is it that binds us together and kind of makes us a sorority or a fraternity, in your opinion?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. I don't think there's any one size fits all, but I certainly do think there's a few characteristics. What I always think about for teachers and for educators in general is that I really believe that the educator who's in it for the right reasons, it's coming from their heart. And it's what I refer to as having the heart of a teacher. And so even as a leader, and I've been in leadership actually far longer than I was as a teacher, but I think I have that heart. Well, I don't think, I know I have that heart because it's something that matters a lot to me. I mean, I want to help students, but it's also about helping families, and I want to help families to realize their dreams for their kids. I want to help teachers to realize their dreams as professionals, and I want to help leaders who want to grow their understanding of their practice and help them to better lead and to understand how to do that. And so all of those things, so the power of that comes from within their heart and they're wanting to do it. I think for international educators, another part is that they see themselves more in a global perspective, and they want to not only experience the world as travelers going elsewhere, but they want to experience it more than just through travel, but they want to live in a place because they want to connect and understand other people from other cultures. And they see that that broadens their understanding of the world, and they know they can impact and help others too. So I think that all of those, both of those components really are there, the heart of the teacher and just the interest in international, the international lifestyle and living abroad, not just traveling abroad.
And so knowing that you've got the heart of the teacher, I'm also presuming you've got that desire to internationally get to know cultures. How have you fit into the Chinese culture? Can you tell us a little bit about, did you get, some Chinese along the way? Do you have a Chinese family by any chance? So how deep are you how deep are you into China?
Yeah.
Love that.
Well, I guess that goes back to that question, or just like earlier when I mentioned the colleague I had, and she said, well, I can be as international as I want, or I can be as Chinese as I want. So I think one of the things when you work in an international school is that you can meet so many people who are from lots of countries, not just your host country, but many places. So, and I worked there for a long time, so I have really deep relationships and connections with many people, both who still are at the school and some who've moved on to other places. So I've gotten a lot of connections with people from China there. Wherever I've worked internationally, I've always valued the idea of actually having friends who are from that country. And so that to me is really important. And I'm talking about, really close relationships with people from the host country. And so I think that really helps to understand what it's like a lot more to live in that country and to be there than just having casual relationship. And so that is something that's really important for me. I wanted to learn Chinese. You asked about Chinese, knowing it as a language. And when I moved here originally, I wanted to, and I always heard, well, it was easier to learn another language after you've already learned one second language. And I do speak Spanish. And at the time, I was fluent in that when I first moved here because I lived in Mexico for many years, as you know, as I said earlier. And I thought, well, maybe it might be easier to learn Chinese. Well, it's not. And I think that it's a much more difficult language for me to access. Well, for probably most people when they're learning it, because of both the characters are not, it's not familiar. And obviously the words are not so much familiar. And so it's hard to access it.
Mm-hmm.
I think also my brain is a lot older than when I learned Spanish. And so I think that has a bit to do with it as well. And so I have tried, but I came to some realization. I was like, okay, well, this is as good as it's going to get. And so I just accept that. So, but I've learned a lot of workarounds in order to be able to live here and work here. And, I mean, I have a lot of different ways to be able to access life here, and I get along okay. I'm not obviously anything close to fluent in Chinese, and I don't purport to be, but I have decent survival Chinese, and so
Mm-hmm.
I can get along okay. I can do all the things I need to do, and I've got enough patience with working with another language so that I know, okay, if this way didn't work how I said it, I can try to figure out another way to say it instead. And pretty much it gets along, and I've managed to survive for 12 and a half years here, so I guess I can probably continue to do so.
I have a very important question that will tell us how how much you've gone into the Chinese culture. Chicken feet, yes or no?
I just had it yesterday. I just ate some yesterday.
All right.
Yeah, they're good. I like
Hey,
them. I'm
woo.
pretty adventurous with food, so I'm willing to try
Wow.
most things, not everything. My rule basically, if I can at least recognize what it is, I'm probably will give it at least a try. And so, yeah, chicken feet, I like them. I just,
Yeah.
just yesterday had it in part of my meal.
Kelley, as we sort of wind down, your new book, it's the gift hiring method. Tell us about the book and when can we buy it? You said it's your newest book. Tell us a little bit about
Yeah, that book is going to be coming out in January, and so I'm in the production phases of it right now. So I just got back over the weekend the proofreading from the book, and I've already had editor going through it. So it's right now in the final stages of that, and so it's going to the audiobook version and getting ready for the printing the cover and doing the interior design for the it's getting close to being ready, and but the book is already written. So that book, it's going to come out in January, and so I've got some couple of things that goes with that. So there'll be some courses that I'll be working with and designing in order to help people to know how to implement these strategies within their school. So it's meant for the school leader who basically the story when you're in leadership and you're hiring people. Unfortunately, sometimes while we have many people who are good hires, we also get our share of hires that are not so good. And sometimes, how does that happen? And, once in a while, you might go, okay, well, it's just sort of luck. But then after a point, you kind of go, well, what's the situation here? And why is that happening? That's the kind of the PhD part of me that looked at that and said, well, what was going on when I had made some hires or helped participate in hires that weren't that successful. And I wanted to figure out why did I not do that so well and what was the part of it. And so I really started studying that process much more carefully. I read some books about it and did some research on it. And I realized that in university and college, people don't really get much training on how to do that. And that's a critical part of their job as leadership to hire people. But yet the training is basically, okay, have a mock interview. And that's about it. You do a mock interview and maybe you switch roles and one person is the interviewer and the next person the next time around is the interviewee. And that's all. And that's not good enough because there is a science behind interviewing and behind designing a thoughtful, carefully a carefully prepared process to make quality hiring possible. And it can happen, and it does happen, but it takes time to do that. And people have to understand what the process is to make that work. And so that's where this came from. And so that process, which I helped to work with in our school and we designed for that, is what is the basis for this book, the hiring method, the gift hiring method. And so it's basically 10 rules about what we can follow to make our hiring highly effective, and so that we can find good quality candidates. One thing that's important to remember is that a candidate might be a really great candidate, but they're not always a great candidate for every single school. But we have to find schools that match us. So, some people, for example, they want to work independently and they like being their own to make decisions academically and teaching and so on. And so maybe working in a small school makes great sense for them and they are going to be a great fit in that kind of an environment. On the other hand, if you have a candidate who is maybe really wants to be part of a team and likes bouncing ideas off of one another, then they're going to probably be much more comfortable working in a larger school. They're not going to be as happy in that smaller school environment. So it's about finding the right candidate, which is part of what my first book, The Teacher Lead Abroad, is about. But it also connects to this part because this is the gift hiring method is for the administrator, helping them to find who are the right kind of candidates to bring on board to their team that they're working with in their schools. And so I can help them to figure out some of those nuances that can help them to be able to better figure that out and who are the right kind of candidates to bring on board.
And when you're talking, you're going to have courses. Is this going to be some kind of video course or is it live with you, or how is that going to look?
It's going to be kind of a hybrid. So what I have are video courses. So I've got one that's going to be coming out just in a few weeks. In fact, well, in a couple months rather, it'll be coming out. And then so that will be an online component. So it's self-paced. But then there also will be some live interaction that'll be in there as well. So I will meet with people as a group and we'll have some group meetings twice a month. And so that they can ask questions and have some interactions while they're also going through that course itself. So it's got a little bit of both parts of it. And also for some people, if they just want to have some extra one-on-one work or have some more in-depth conversation about it, then there can also be just one-on-one consulting as well.
I think that sounds fantastic. I think the idea of being able to tap into your knowledge, I think a lot of administrators out there that might be struggling with, as you say, having those consistently good hires, I think they're going to be reaching out quite quickly to your LinkedIn and looking for that book to come out in January. Is it going to be the same audio? Is it Steve Wilson, you said?
Yep, he's my voice.
He's
my
your guy.
professional
He's your
voice.
guy. All right. Well, that's great.
Well, and that system also, I mean, it not only helps to bring about great hires, but it helps to transform the school work culture. And that is really powerful. And it's hard to do as a leader to make that kind of change possible because work culture is our shared values that we as professionals have in the workplace. And so how do we change that is tough to do. But when we start hiring people who fit the work culture that we want to empower within our school, and the more people we bring on board who share those values, it will change the culture. Within just a few years, it will make a demonstrated difference in the school. And so that is another side effect that's a very powerful one and really can help to propel the school to move forward.
I love that idea. Hey, Kelley, we have a couple of questions that we always like to ask our guests. In your travels from Mexico to Korea to China, are there 3 things that you need to make your home a home?
Well, the first thing is I always like to have pictures of my family. So there's some family memories and things. So always, whenever I move to a new country, I like to take out my photos that, and I have them to various frames of people that are important for me, to me, my family members. And so that always helps me to feel kind of at home. My books, some of my books there now, I've pared down. I'm more into the ebooks now, but they're just some of these books that I'm not going to be able to get rid of. And so no matter where I'm now, I used to have around 4,000 books in physical books, and they were mostly in storage. So I had to pare down most of those. So I'm now down to around
So
400, but
difficult.
this
Yep.
is it. So this is what I'm keeping
10%.
from now on. So I have to have those books. And, I think that probably some of the other thing might be is just at least when I'm able to go back home is to have some of the comfort foods that I like.
Mhm.
So, my guilty pleasure is Cheetos, but don't tell anybody. So that's it. So, those are the things that for me, it helps. And
Well,
well,
Taobao
yeah,
can pretty much order anything. I remember ordering all kinds of stuff from Canadian Costco. There was a lady that had a Taobao store. Taobao's like the Amazon of China. And she had a Canadian Costco store on Taobao. So I could just go and go, I want this,
Hey.
and this. And it would just get sent over to me in China.
no,
Of course, you're
yeah,
paying a lot more than what you're,
Yeah.
but I was happy. So you could probably get Cheetos on Taobao.
yeah. Well, they could have Cheetos here, but it's their unique flavors for their, that are pleasant for here in China. It's not quite the one that I want, but you're right though. I mean, that's one of the things that's amazing about living here is I don't really get food cravings because I can get just about anything and everything that I want here. And so I've just, and even if you can't get the exact thing, sometimes you just find alternatives that are close enough. And so, I can find all that here. And so I really love that. It's is easy to do. And just like you mentioned, there's Taobao, but also a lot of stores. You just go into them and you're going to find various things. And so there's a few basic products that I really like, and I've figured out where those are and what those are, and that really satisfies me. The only thing I can't find the alternative for is Mexican food. So I cannot get that. So I just learned that I just have that when I return back to the US. And here, when I have Mexican food, I just refer to it as food because it's not really the Mexican food that I know.
Let's go out for food.
Yes.
Ken?
Well, JP, man, I'm worried there's not enough time to hear the number of stories that Kelley's going to have in the next segment of our program.
Come on now. You think he has that many police stories?
Kelley,
I
tell us,
think
you've
he's-
been around the world. Surely you've had a run-in with the authorities, customs, police, SWAT teams, whatever you got. You got a run-in? You got a little story you could tell us about?
Well, I do, I guess. So I've thought about this one a bit because I had wind that this was going to be coming down the line. So I anticipated. So yeah, when I was living in Mexico, I had my car, and when I was living in Guadalajara, so I had my car there, and I was driving down the road one day, and I pulled up at a light, and I just looked over at the person next to me that was sitting in the vehicle next to me, and that was a police car. It was a police officer, and I just looked over. I was at the light, and he tells me to pull over.
Oh, no.
And so I had to pull over, and I wasn't going anywhere because I was just at the light. And so he looks at my driver's license. And so then he says, well, you have one, I think that particular situation, he said, well, you have one license plate. I'm going to have to impound your driver's license. Now, one license plate in New Mexico, that there is only one license plate. There is not two. There's not one on the front and the back of the car. So, but that's not the way it was in Mexico. But, there wasn't a car was registered in the US. And so that was what his pretense was. And so what they
Yep.
say was they'll say like, well, I have to take this license. Is that okay? And is that okay
Nope.
Is that a question?
Yeah, well, it's a watchword for, well, there's a way around this if you want to avoid that. And so I didn't really know. So I was just like, well, if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. And so he
You
took the
called him on it.
license, and so I had to go and retrieve the license. Well, then I later learned that, well, if you wanted to avoid that problem, then you have to offer a little gratuity of thanks and gratitude
Thank you.
for
A little
helping me
gratitude.
Yes.
understand the errors of my ways. And so that was the
To
way
not
to
look at
avoid.
other people when you're driving. Wow.
Oh,
So you
Kelley, I
just have
love
to
that.
learn the language of what that actually means.
Well, let's do final thoughts. We'll start with JP Mint, then we'll go to you, Kelley. JP, your final thoughts.
Yeah, I've just really appreciated getting to know you a little bit better, and I really also would like to thank you for coming onto the show, and I look forward to these 2 books. I might just be listening to Steve Wilson's audio version. So thank you so much. Ken?
Well, Kelley, final thoughts.
Well, I appreciate Jacqueline and Kent that your invitation for me to join you here, and I think really this podcast is terrific because they're literally tens of thousands of educators who are in international education already, and people who are thinking about it and interested in it, and here they can meet people virtually, all around the world who are engaged in this and who think about international education and live that lifestyle. And so I really think that what you're doing here is important, and I think it's still fun, and I like that too, and that you have fun with it, but it also has a good message and a serious message behind it as well. And so both of those are really valuable. So thanks for that opportunity to be able to join you here today and to talk about these things. We all are passionate about. We've got the heart of educators, don't we?
And the desire to be international. Those 2 for sure.
I would like to thank my co-host, JP Mint. You can find her at jpmintconsulting.com. Thank you so much, JP.
Thank you.
I would also like to thank our very special guest, Dr. Kelley Ridings. You can find Dr. Kelley Ridings at edunetpro.com. You can also read his 2 books, Teach or Lead Abroad and The Gift Hiring Method, coming out in January. We'd encourage you to check out those books. Thank you so much, Kelley, for joining us.
All right. Thank you so much, both of you.
And I'm Ken Cat Guy. You can find me in room 303 eating a bag of Cheetos. We will see you all next time.
I'll be Joe.